James, if China has expanded trade with other countries to replace the US, does it even need the US anymore?
I mean, China is still, or Chinese companies, I should say, are still selling about $1 billion worth of stuff to America every day. You know, there's still $1 billion of phones and, you know, everything from T-shirts to phones going into containers to cross the Pacific Ocean to go to LA port, to go to the other ports in America. So, you know, you can't just take that away and have nothing happen. Obviously, the companies that are still selling those goods depend on American customers, even though, you know, as you're saying, you've seen double-digit falls in exports to the US for the last 8 months. I mean, America is still a substantial market for Chinese companies, and lots of Chinese goods are making their way to America via third countries now. You know, Vietnam being probably the most, you know, the biggest one, but you know, Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Mexico. There are lots of Chinese components and Chinese goods that are going to those places, being transformed or not transformed, and then eventually making their way into America. So, you know, the Chinese companies cannot do without American, or they would make a lot less money if they had to do completely without America's market. But, you know, I think what you're seeing here today is in the data today is two things. One, there are other markets in the world. You know, America is not the only place that wants to buy things from China. There are other companies in other countries around the world that do value Chinese goods. They see them as increasingly good quality. They see them as cheap. And they want to buy from China. And the second thing we're seeing is really the biggest story, I think, is how weak Chinese domestic demand is, and how much more they're able to fulfill their own needs domestically, so they don't have to go and buy from other countries. I think that's where you're seeing this massive trade surplus coming from.
So on that point, the Politburo has also now decided to prioritize boosting domestic demand in 2026. But China has been trying to boost consumption for a long time, right? So does this mean we're going to see some kind of stimulus getting rolled out or some kind of a one-time incentive?
I think, you know, if I can't explain the difference between prioritizing domestic consumption this year for 2026, then last year's aim for 2025, which was boosting domestic consumption. You know, these are very, very, you know, it's kind of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin kind of questions, trying to pass the difference in that. I think the people who are looking at this, you know, saying that there's going to be a little bit more stimulus, there is going to be a little bit more of a focus on the domestic market, but it isn't really a massive change in, I think, how the government is seeing the domestic economy. And also, I don't think that's then going to flow through to foreign exporters who might want to try and export to the Chinese economy. And the reason for that is, as I said, the stimulus that people are expecting is not very large, so the effect is not going to be that large. And secondly, Chinese companies are more capable and more able to fill those holes, fill those gaps. China is less reliant than it's ever been really on imports. And so even if there is a boost in the domestic economy, a lot of that is just going to be taken up by Chinese companies, which are, you know, are more competitive and often cheaper than their foreign competitors. So even if there is a domestic rebalancing in China, the flow-through effects of that to foreign countries is going to be much less than, say, in 2008, when you saw a massive stimulus from the government, and that flowed through all over the world. It was one of the things that really brought the world out of the global financial crisis. I don't think we're going to see something like that this time.